How's everybody doing? All right. We're going to be studying Judges tonight on the story of Gideon. So you could actually go ahead, and I think it's up there. Chapter 6, verse 11 is where we're going to start. But before we talk about Gideon, I want to set what's going on in Judges in place for you so you can kind of understand a little bit about what's going on. The book of Judges is one of the most exciting and difficult books in the entire Old Testament. The reason for this, it's difficult because everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It reminds me of Murphy's Law, and that's the way it happened for the Israelites. They went through a cycle over and over and over. In Judges, you'll find that there are 6 major judges and there are 6 minor judges. This is to equal 12 tribes in Israel. There is one other judge, but he actually was considered a king, and he was an Israelite and is not considered one of the judges of God. I believe his name is Abelhoff. He did not do the will of God as a judge, so he's considered a king. Now, because it is in the book that we see God at work in the lives of the people of Israel, that we see the exciting part. God actually will use different people in different circumstances. What he does, God moves again and again, and he says to us, "You are my people. I will bless you. I will maintain you in this land, but you're only going to be blessed in this land if you're going to obey me." You see, Judges teaches us that we all make mistakes repetitively sometimes, and we have to continuously go back and pray about it and find the best way to handle it. Where we're going to find ourselves with Gideon is a point. He is the 6th judge. Now, many times the Israelites have made the wrong decisions over and over again, so much that his own father had actually built a tower to Baal. So before we start in there, we're going to bow for prayer in the reading for God. Father, maker of heaven and earth, as we gather in your glorious presence, make us worthy to stand before you through the sacrifice of your Son, Jesus Christ. Search us, Father, how you know our hearts and our thoughts. Let your word speak to us, and the Holy Spirit do a work in us, Lord, that we may open our minds to study your word. In Jesus Christ's name, amen. Now, Gideon was not your typical major leader. He was not a big warrior. Matter of fact, when we find Gideon, he's actually hiding inside of a wine press. He is scared. He's afraid about what's going on. What you'll find in Judges 6:1 through 10 is that Midian, who is the head of the Midianites, had brought them for 7 years. And the Amalekites had came as well, and the people of the east. To get a mental picture, the best way to describe it is a Arab desert people. And they would come after the harvest had sown. And they would take everything from the Israelites. And I mean everything. Every ox, every donkey, everything from them for 7 years. It had broken the Israelites down. So much so that here we find Gideon hiding inside of a wine press, cowering away. He's threshing wheat. He's not actually making wine at all. He's not making grape juice or anything. He's down in there threshing wheat. Okay? So this is where we're going to start. "And there came an angel of the Lord and sat under an oak, which was in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abiezerite, and his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thy mighty man of valor." Now, a wine press, I don't know if any of y'all have ever looked up what these things look like, but it's a hole in the ground that's constructed of stone, comes out of the ground, comes up a good ways, and different ones are different sizes. But in this case, Gideon's down there hiding. There's not a lot of room inside this wine press, especially if there's anybody else in there actually down there making any juice. So he's down in there, he's threshing wheat, and he's throwing it back up. the wheat and the barley. And you could imagine this scene. Here's a man who's threshing this wheat. He's throwing it back up. It's probably coming back down on top of him. He's got this wheat and this barley all over his hair. And here comes an angel of the Lord sitting by an oak tree looking down at this guy. And you mighty man of valor. You know, he's probably sitting there thinking, are you talking to me? You know, it couldn't possibly be me, you know. So Gideon answers him in verse 13. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. The story of Gideon is constantly marked with doubt and uncertainty. His favorite terms are, God, show me a sign. Give me a miracle to prove that this is the right direction to go. And he did it over and over and over. What I'll challenge you tonight to do is look for the ifs. We already noticed the first if. He was really good at saying, Lord, if. So look for the ifs that we're going to find in here, because he would say it over and over again. You're going to see a lot of patterns if you study the full book of Judges, and this is one of them in the story of Gideon. On verse 14, and the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? And he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said unto him, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. And he said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, then show me a sign, that thou talkest with me. Depart not hence, I pray thee, until I come unto thee, and bring forth my present, and set it before thee. And he said, I will tarry until thou come again. Now, what's actually happened here is that instead of chastising Gideon and telling him how he was wrong, he actually turned and told him, no, you're actually going to deliver Israel. And here goes Gideon. But Lord, if you'll show me a sign. Now, it's not enough that this is an angel talking to him. It's not enough already that, you know, he's having a conversation that's not very common for anybody else at that time, especially for the children of Israel. Okay? God has a way of choosing unlikely candidates to do his work. He deliberately picked Gideon. Gideon was a coward that was hiding in a wine press. He was no great warrior. He was the least amongst his family, who was the least amongst his tribe, who was the least amongst the village, who was the least amongst Manasseh. He was the lowest on the lowest of the totem pole. He wasn't the guy that you would have said, okay, let's bring all the warriors up, and we're going to take him. He's going to be the leader. That wasn't Gideon. And Gideon knew this. So Gideon turned and looked at him and said, tell you what, I'll bring an offering to you, and you show me a sign. So that's what's going on here at the end there, is you'll see when they're talking, depart not hence, I pray thee, is he's telling them, I'm going to come back and bring you an offering so that you can do a work in front of me to see. So off Gideon goes to prepare a sacrifice. When he had finished and brought it out, the angel of the Lord asked him to put it on a rock. In verse 19, and Gideon went in and made ready a kid, and unleavened cakes of an ephah of flour, and the flesh he put in a basket. And he put the broth in a pot and brought it out unto him under the oak and presented it. And the angel of God said unto him, Take the flesh and the unleavened cakes and lay them upon this rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put forth the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the flesh of the unleavened cakes. And there rose up fire out of the rock and consumed the flesh and the unleavened cakes. Then the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Now this is important because he says the angel of the Lord actually departed out of his sight. Okay, he's not there with him anymore. And when Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord, Gideon said, Alas, O Lord God, for because I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face. And the Lord said unto him, Peace be unto thee, fear not, thou shalt not die. Gideon was scared. He felt he was going to die. It clicked all of a sudden when the sign appeared and the rock had fire rise right out of it in front of his eyes. This was from the Lord. So the time for Gideon's excuses had come to an end. Then Gideon built an altar there unto the Lord and called it Jehovah Shalom. Unto this day it is yet in Ophrah and of the Abiezerites. Now you have to forgive me. Some of these names are very tongue-twisting, and I purposely left out some end parts because they get into a lot of them, and I'll just try to fill in the blanks for you as best I can. There are just a lot of tough ones in there. The angel commanded Gideon to tear down his father's altar of Baal, a Canaanite storm god. Gideon's father, Joash, had no business having it. As you heard me earlier, I had said that Joash had an altar to Baal. This was not uncommon in Judges to see. Ishtar was another god that the children of Israel started leaning towards doing and building different things. Tablets are found, and this is where they kept going in this cycle. They followed a cycle that went through failure, judgment, repentance, deliverance, and then restoration. This happened 6 times. 6 times this cycle happened. So 6 times God rose up a judge and delivered them. And this time it was going to be Gideon. In verse 25, and it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal, that thy father hath cut down the grove that is by it. And build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock in the ordered place. And take the second bullock, and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove, which thou shalt cut down. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants, and did as the Lord had said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could not do it by day, that he did it by night. The simple phrase in verse 27 is, he feared his father's household and men of the city, tells us how the Israelites had strayed from God. Okay, they had totally forgotten the miraculous power of God that delivered them to where they had come that day. They had totally forgotten all the cycles that had happened prior to them where they had been delivered. They were more afraid of public opinion than they were of God. Does this sound like anyone you know? Gideon was so scared, and you're going to see this. This is why I refer to him as a coward. Most theologians, when they talk about him, they call him Gideon the coward. However, he does rise up a mighty warrior, but not of his own power. It is of God's. And that's where the wonderful, amazing story comes from. Okay? Gideon did something nobody expected. He didn't turn and challenge again and say, give me a sign. He instantly followed and decided he was going to go ahead and tear down the altar of Baal. In verse 28, and when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and the grove was cut down, and there was by it the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. And they said one to another, Who hath done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, hath done this thing. Then the men of the city said unto Joash, Bring out thy son, that he may die, because he hath cast down the altar of Baal, because he hath cut down the grove that was by it. This is a really cool part, because this is where you're going to see the son, who is the least, we already know, of the least of the least of the least, rises up and actually teaches the father something that he doesn't wake up that morning to his altar being gone and instantly chastise his son. Listen to what he says. The men of the city, and Joash said unto all that stood against him, Will ye plead for Baal? Will ye save him? He that will plead for him, let him put to death whilst it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. Therefore on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, Let Baal plead against him, because he hath thrown down his altar. He renamed his own son Jerub-Baal. So if you hear anybody ever say that, what is the story of Jerub-Baal? This is the story of Jerub-Baal. This is Gideon. This is also consequently the same name that you see as the Gideon's Association. The three men that founded it in America when they were getting together were led by a man named Samuel, and he actually had a dream, and in his dream, he thought of chapter 6 and 7 of Judges, and decided he would name it the Gideon's Association. All too often, most of us sit back saying somebody should do something. Somebody should stand against secularism or paganism in our society, and God's reply usually is, why don't you do it? When you're going to take a stand in your home or at your work or in your neighborhood or your community, church, God is still in the business of eliminating our excuses. An excuse is nothing more than a lie packaged to look like an explanation. As soon as Gideon took a stand, fearful as he was, people were willing to follow him, even his own father, who got up that morning not expecting the least of all his sons. And that's the amazing thing, is that he knew that if the least amongst his sons, the most fearful, the one that was cowering in a wine press earlier that day when he was found, if he got up and tore down Baal's altar, then it must have been the direction of God. In verse 33, then all Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezer was gathered after him. And he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, who was gathered after him. And he sent him messengers unto Asher and unto Zebulun and unto Naphtali, and they came to meet them. Now, I know I didn't pronounce Naphtali. Naphtali is the correct way, sorry. So all these people started gathering around and following Gideon. They started showing up. Now, remember, this is still the same Gideon that was scared in the wine press, that was scared so much he still had to go at night. So now he's getting all these people coming up. He knows the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people and children and men of the east are going to be coming. Okay, but here comes all these people to follow the least among the least among the least. Before Gideon realized what he was doing, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him and rallied an army against the Midianites. People came from all the surrounding towns and all the northern tribes. They showed up saying, "We're here to follow you." Gideon was not used to being a leader, so he went back into his fear mode, and this is what he did. Listen to these verses. And Gideon said unto God, "If thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, and thou hast said, Behold, I will put a fleece of wool in the floor, and if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry upon the earth beside, then I shall know that thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said." And it was so, for he rose up early on the morrow, and thrust the fleece together, and wringed the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. Here we go again. If you really want me to do this, I need you to prove this is your will for me. Now, I don't know if y'all have ever tried to take a little thing of fleece and see if you could squeeze a whole bowl of water out of it, but that's an astounding feat in and of itself. But the whole ground around it was dry. He got up the next morning, and sure enough, the fleece was wet and the ground was dry. It was so much he wrung it out into an entire bowl of water. But did he believe God and proceed? This is the interesting thing. This is what he says in 39. And Gideon said unto God, "Let not thine anger be hot against me." This is kind of him saying, don't be mad at me, and I will speak but this once, but let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with the fleece, let it now be dry only upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night, for it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew on the ground. Now I'm going to tell you, this doesn't work in modern day times. You can't test God. That is not the way it works. There was a purpose for the Israelites. There was a purpose for what was going on in Judges. And there are people who will teach that this section here in Judges teaches that, we should go to God and say, just give me a sign. Now, I will point out that God does give you signs. The question is, do we recognize them and do we follow them? As is the case with Gideon, how many signs do you need? It was like he was driving to Vegas and just didn't want to admit it. Not that we need to go to Vegas, but you kind of get the picture here. He got up the next morning, the fleece was dry, and the ground was wet. God was not going to let him off the hook. There was no turning back now. Now, he's still going to continue with the ifs, just so you know. That doesn't change here. But you're beginning to see that this is God's will for his life. It doesn't matter what Gideon was going to throw his way and say to him, this was his choice. This was God's will for his life. And you notice he kept going, though. He never turned away. He never stopped. He just continued to say, well, could I have another sign? So we're going to see here. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people, we're in chapter 7 now. I apologize. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Herod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them, and by the hill Morah in the valley. The people came by the thousands to follow him. They encamped at the spring of Herod, which in the Hebrew language means the place of trembling. You could imagine Gideon was probably starting to tremble a little bit more. There's some ironies that happen a lot of times in these stories, and you can find them. There's another one later I'll let you know about. It still exists today, by the way. You can still go there. It's off the beaten path, and you can still find it. It has a natural spring at Herod, which overlooks the valley below. It was here that God told Gideon that his army of 32,000 was too many. Now, we know it's 32,000 by the way that we're fixing to subtract these men from his army, but he had an army of 32,000. The problem was that there were so many Midianites and Amalekites down in the valley. In verse 12, it says there were as numerous as grasshoppers or locusts. Depends on your translation you're reading from. But in the ancient times, they would often utilize this translation to mean it's too many to number. Because you're going to find other places where, like we see, they actually say 22,000 or 300 men. They said there's too many. So down inside this valley, you have to imagine they're up on a mountain and they're looking down in this valley. Here's all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the other Arabs of the desert people who are camped out there. And what does God go and tell Gideon? And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into thy hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. Now therefore go to proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. However, even after this, God felt it was too many. Gideon still had too many. Now, remember, down in the valley, the Midianites, the Amalekites, their number, they can't even count. We're going to go ahead and send 22,000 scared soldiers home. If you're afraid, all you got to do is raise your hands, and you can go home. Now, I would imagine in that group, there's probably some that were so scared they were just frozen stiff. They didn't even raise their hand. And being in the military, I've met some guys that are like that. Now, there were some of them that are probably there that they just like to fight. They just like war. They were there. They were ready. They were raring to go. And God knew this, so he had a plan on how we're going to sift these people through. In verse 4, and the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down into the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, and the same shall go with thee, and whosoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people into the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, every one that lappeth the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go, every man unto his place. So the people took victuals in their hand, and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of the Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. The Lord knows us all by heart. And he knew the heart of Gideon. He knew what it would take to embolden Gideon. Now, he also knew how to sift through them. What you're reading there is that when he means they lapped waters, you've got a bunch of soldiers all lined up, and some of them are basically kneeling down, and they're getting their water, and they're doing this number. They're lapping it up, kind of still looking around. There are others, they're just head first in there. Those were the ones he sent home. Now, there's thousands upon thousands of commentaries on Judges, and they'll tell you different beliefs on how this system worked. And from the way the story reads, because you always use biblical text to prove text, reading all the chapters before it and all the chapters that precede it, it would seem that God was sifting through the men that were more than likely looking around, because even though they were up on a mountain, they still probably had in their mind, there's a Midianite or an Amalekite somewhere behind this rock, so I'm not going to get too far down here. Now, other commentaries might teach that they were just the smart ones. They were the ones that, instead of that being in their mind, they were down there going, all right, I've got my sword ready. But here, we don't believe that's the case because of the way the text reads and follows, because the Lord had a plan. There was a reason why he sifted them down to 300. In verse 9, and it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Purah, thy servant, down to the host, and thou shalt hear what they say. And afterward shall thy hands be strengthened to go down unto the host. Then went he down with Purah his servant unto the outside of the armed men were the host, that were in the host. Now before I go any further, Purah means foliage. Remember I told you had some ironies in there? So you have Gideon taking Purah, which means foliage. I could only imagine that he's hiding behind Purah, who is envisioned as foliage for some reason. God purposely wanted this man and this particular translation of his name put in here, sent down to see what was going on. He told him, if you're still afraid, go down to them. Go down to their camp where the Midianites and the Amalekites are in that valley, and just see what's going on. So that's what they did. And there with Purah his servant unto outside of the armed men that were in the host, and the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seaside for multitude. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it. There it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. And his fellow answered and said, this is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel, for into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. Midian, remember, is the leader of the Midianites. Something very unusual happened here. When Gideon and Purah got to the edge of the camp where two men were standing there talking, they were sitting there talking about this dream. And this very scared Gideon, went down to this campsite to hear these guards talking, and they're talking about a dream of a barley cake that destroys their camp. And asked, he said, well, what do you think that means? Oh, that's got to be Gideon. He's going to kill us all. Gideon's over there with Purah going, say what? Me? It emboldens him. And he turns and he praises, he worships. It is believed that that's where he got his encouragement for the next battle plan that is one of the coolest battle plans I have to say has ever existed, I think. And it was so when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof that he worshipped and returned to the host of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. So it's still at nighttime. It's still dark. He's like, everybody wake up. The Lord, he's told me what to do. I got the battle plan, fellas. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. And he said unto them, look on me, and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that, as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with a trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of the camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. God had given Gideon a battle plan that was not your typical one. He took these 300 men, and he said, I want 100 of you on one side. I want 100 of you on the other side of the valley. I'm going to have 100 of you right here. We're going to take a trumpet. We're going to take a pitcher, and within it, we're going to put our lamp. Now, in ancient times, during that time, there was not a lot of battles at night. You're not going to find a lot of them recorded in history in this time frame. They do happen, but there's not a lot of them. You'll find in studying a lot of the battles that when they did use it, they used about 1 torchlight per about 100 men or so. This is important to understand because it kind of will give you an understanding about what's about to happen and why this battle plan was so cool. Because it's not like that Hollywood movie, 300, where you have the Spartans, which that is a historical reference to, a battle that happened, but they didn't win. I don't know why they got the Hollywood movie and Gideon didn't, because Gideon actually won with 300 men, not actually, losing. But Gideon won, and he did it by telling them, men, go up here. What we're going to do is we're going to crash these pitchers. We're going to raise these lamps up, and we're going to blow our horns. Okay? This is huge. And then they're going to say, for the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. These men were asleep. And we already know 2 of them were sitting there talking about Gideon's going to be a barley cake that comes upon us and destroys us all. So we already know that's in the mindset of at least 2 of them. So what happens? So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came into the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch. They had newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hands, and the trumpets in their right hands, blow withal. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran, cry, and fled. It doesn't take 1,000 people to make a difference in the world in which we live. The Midianites and the Amalekites, and that's the reason why I stopped here at verse 21, with as they stood every man in place round about the camp, and the host ran, cried, and fled. 22 and therefore goes into a lot of the places they went. But basically what's going to happen is the Midianites and the Amalekites come out, and a lot of them flee, as it says there. But what happens thereafter is a lot of them kill each other. You have two different people groups, two different dialects, confused in the middle of the night. You've got these crashing pots that sound like there's a horde waiting on the other side of this valley. You see all these lights up on the hill and these horns blowing, and here comes the Lord and his chosen Gideon. They all run. And those that were left by the morning, Gideon and the people who rose up to follow him thereafter tracked them down and took them out. If a few people will get out and make some noise for God and wave the light of the truth in the darkness, God will multiply and magnify their efforts. There is no telling what you and I could do for the cause of Christ if we really tried. That is the true message here, that Gideon shows us that he was scared. He was afraid at every turn. He turned to God and said, just show me one more sign. The other day, when I got the call to do this, I was working out. And the reason why I chose this story, because after I'd said yes, because I was breathing real hard at the same time because they caught me in the middle, I was like, yeah. After I hung up the phone, I realized I'd said yes. I went, uh-oh. And Gideon popped in my head. The reason why it's important is because I'd been talking to Brother Donnie, I'd been talking to Brother Tim, I'd been talking to my family. I think I probably talked to everybody that would talk to me, and if anybody knows me, that's a lot of people. Okay? And I kept going, Lord, just, provide me the opportunity. I'm ready to go through that door. You see, that's the way God uses signs in our lives. I'm not saying that you won't get a sign, because we're going to get a big one when he comes. But he works in ways that we have to be willing to follow, even when we're scared. Nothing can rise against you when you have the power of God. But it takes knowing, even if there's a valley full of Amalekites and Midianites and a number that they don't even put a number to you. They just say, you're like locusts. There's so many of you. That you go, I'm good. I'm going to go there. We have missionaries all over the world who go and follow the will of God. But we have places right here in Paris, where we stand up and follow the will of God. God has always been in the business of doing the impossible. Sometimes it was the only way to keep the promise alive. Usually it was the only way to remind people that the promiser was greater than the promise. The Bible reminds us, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. You'll find that in 2 Timothy 1:7. It is a lesson we all need to remember. God is more interested in our finding him in life struggles than protecting us from life struggles. I hope all of you can see why Gideon is such a really cool story. The Old Testament is full of the stories of our lives and how we live them. That's why they speak to all generations, the total inerrancy of the Bible. It is the true Word of God.